All right. Hello and welcome to this power ranking of the teams going into Valorant Masters Bangkok 2025. Where we're today going to talk about each team of that's going to Bangkok, and at the same time, this is kind of going to be like a final episode of my VCT roundup series that's been going on. So I will talk a bit about the games, the final games that happened, and how I feel about the teams after those games. And I'm gonna go in order. So I'm gonna do the second seed, first seed of each region, and I'm gonna do it in when the region's finished. So we're gonna start off with China and Trace Esports, where I would say like this, Trace. I would say it's probably maybe slightly underrated coming into this tournament, although their meta read is a bit odd, I will say. Playing Noteo and all this, I don't really know how I feel about their overall meta read. But I mean, they got the players. I mean, Locking is incredible. Fang Fang is incredible. Hebei is great. Bianx incredible. Kai, like this team just all around has a lot of great players, and there's a reason this team 13 for EDG twice, and it's not because they're absolutely dominant than EDG, but it's because they can match up to EDG's top level, and I seriously believe that. And while I still have them slightly below EDG here, I will say that's mostly just because I feel like EDG has more of that experience at an international level, and I feel like at an international level, at least at this current moment, I see that EDG has looked in general better at an international level, and in general also, or actually, it doesn't really have to do with how they've looked at an international level. How Traces looked, it's more about that EDG almost always slightly overperforms on an international level. So I've kind of taken that into account. I don't want to over commit to that, as I do feel like I still want to give EDG some criticism, as I do feel like they did look kind of shaky, especially in China. And sure, they've done that multiple times before and then just cleaned it up afterwards. And I feel like that's kind of what we saw in this tournament. But I do feel like I need to still give some props to Trace, as I do feel like they're a really good team and could actually go pretty far in this tournament. And when, by the way, when you look at the stats down here, on the other ones, I will have the VLR rating as well. But obviously in China, for some reason, they don't track that. I don't really know why that is. But either way, so the stats, it's going to look a bit more empty here than it will on the other regions. Either way, moving on to EDG, and I give them a B. I would say they're probably one of the lower B teams, although I would probably put them like I'd say like this. If we're gonna put like on a list, which we're gonna do later, I would probably put like EDG and Trace pretty similar, with maybe T1 on a similar level, at least at this current moment. And I mean, when we look at this tournament, I mean, Kong Kong just like genuinely, Kong Kong is just ridiculous. He's just a ridiculous player. It's actually unfair. Like these numbers might not look like, if you just compare to the rest of the team, obviously they're insane. But like we're gonna go through now with every single team, and you'll see that ACS stat, and like nobody is close to that ACS stats. It's just ridiculous what this man pulls up for numbers. And I mean, the rest of this team, we know how good individually they are. I mean, Chichu, Smoggy, nobody. Obviously, Simon, his stats look bad, but we all know how good of a support he is, especially for this team. And I feel like that's kind of what he is. He's kind of like the boaster of Fnatic, but he's not IGLing, obviously. Um, but yeah, a pretty decent team, I'd say. They looked pretty good, although, as I've previously mentioned, I do have a bit of worry, as I do feel like the other China teams have kind of catched up slightly, and I don't know if that's EDG not looking as good or if that's just a bit of shakiness as it's been before. Because I feel like EDG didn't still like we've seen them lose before and look shaky, but they've not looked this shaky before, at least in my experience. Moving on to Pacific, we have T1. where I put them in B. As I said, I put them somewhere like in between EDG and like on the same level as EDG and Trace. Although I will say Trace is the worst of those three. I will say they're kind of similar. Um, I do think this T1 team has a higher ceiling than, actually no, they don't really have a higher ceiling than either of those two teams. But I do feel like this team has potential to go further than at least Trace, I think. I think they're very similar to EDG in my thoughts on them. And obviously we have the question mark on Sylvan because is it going to be Sylvan or is it going to be Carpe? We'll see. Obviously Sylvan didn't look amazing, and I will say Carpe probably looked better, but that's still a bit of an unfair comparison. And considering this is an international, they might play Carpe, honestly. We'll see though. Obviously, we know Buzz and Stacks are incredible. Meteor actually had a bit of an underwhelming tournament, although those stats actually don't look right. Either way, I might correct them if that's the case. So yeah. Either way, moving on to DRX, and I've put DRX in A. I do have some worries that they'll struggle a bit under pressure, but I feel like you still gotta take it at face value and the Valorant that has been played so far, and DRX has been by far the best team in Pacific, and I would say easily a top 3 team in the world. They have looked so good. Freeing has looked absolutely incredible. Hyunmin as well have looked like those two pickups are just ridiculous. And yeah, I'm seeing now that these stats on these two teams are the exact same on both Flashback and Meteor, so they're probably wrong. My That's my fault. Either way, I mean Mako has looked good as usual. Bane has looked solid. Flashback, I'm pretty sure looks pretty good as well. I feel like I remember his stats being pretty good. Either way, this team has just overall looked really good, and I think their meta read is solid as well. Um, I as I said, I do have some concerns of pressure succumbing to them, and maybe they might not perform as well as we have seen them crumble under pressure before. Like that Gen G game, which they almost lost T1 in the finals. Like, although in the final, I'm not really taking that to blame too much. Either way, I still think the RX are going to be really good. I do have some concerns, but I do still think they're going to be a top team. Um, and I feel like if you're looking just to power rank these teams right now, if you're not even considering anything, this team is top 3 in the world, and I don't think that can be argued against. Moving on, we have Sentinels, where they've had a really interesting journey, as I do feel like I was a bit worried for them in the beginning, but the longer it went on, the more they looked really good. And I will say by the final game against G2 in the finals, they looked really good. I will say it kind of looked like it was mostly just Sentinels giga anteing G2, and that's how they got 2 maps. And we'll come to that a bit later when we talk about G2. Um, but overall, I feel like this team just looked good. Like against MIBR, sure, there was like that Pearl, which was a fucking gigabanger with like 21-19 or something. But other than that, like Sentinels just destroyed them, and I feel like Sentinels have a good meta read as well. And I feel like with a bit of time off, sure, not as much as the China teams, but still a bit of time off here, they could really be looking like one of the top teams and could honestly even maybe be competing for a title. I put them in A tier, below DRX though. Yeah, and obviously second has looked good. I will say Celsius number I'm a bit concerned for. Celsius is the one player that I'm a bit concerned for. Mostly it's just because he was so good by the end, but looked kind of poor in the beginning. So I don't have much thoughts. I don't know what to expect from Celsius coming into this tournament. Bang and Narrate, feel like have been solid additions. I do feel like they it has taken a bit of time for both of them to kind of fit into the system. But I think with time and over the entirety of the kickoff tournament, it looked better and better. And that's kind of, I feel like, what made it so that they improved so quickly was that those two players got better into the system as the tournament went on, and it looked more coordinated, everything. Moving on to G2, and here we got the first S tier team. We're gonna have two of them. We're gonna have actually two in each tier. I will say though, G2 is my huge favorite to win this tournament. Um, I mean, G2 are just looking ridiculous right now. Like that grand final, even though G2 looked like they got giganted on some maps, they still felt in control somewhat. Like they looked like the better team throughout that entire game. Although I will say it was a bit concerning as some maps it almost looked like they shot it was a bit whiffy at times from G2. Maybe that was because of the anti and them being caught off guard by the positioning of the Sentinel players. But either way, even after that game, I'm actually almost like more convinced after they actually managed to win that game against Sentinels that they're my number one favorite, and it's not really close. Because as they managed to win that game, especially after being down, shows really strong mental. On top of also just like in general, I feel like this team can take a lot from that Sentinels game. Look at what Sentinels did and look at those holes and probably patch that up a bit. Maybe even on other maps, which they haven't shown as much, they could even look at and try to find similar holes. As I feel like it looked, honestly, to me, this G2 roster reminds me a lot of Fnatic when they went to Tokyo and lost to Liquid in the final and then didn't drop a map. That's kind of how I feel about this G2 team. They look so fucking good. And while they didn't lose the final per se, I feel like this final obviously meant more than what the final did for Fnatic. As that point, Champions Point was nothing. I feel like Fnatic basically just did not show any more than what they already had shown. So yeah. Overall though, G2, yeah, they're gonna be good. They're gonna be probably the best team and are my 100% favorites to win this event going into it. Moving on to the final region, and we have EMEA with Team Liquid, which is definitely a surprise here, and they are going to be pretty low as well. I do think they looked good at the end of the tournament, and I do feel like they really got close to Team Vitality, but at the same time, in that Team Vitality game, you saw at you saw like the way Team Liquid plays is they're taking like proactive timings that are kind of risky but works so well. But now with teams actually being able to watch them and see how they play and actually have some time off to actually do that, and on top of that, like even in the grand final, like you saw after they lost those two maps, Team Vitality managed to come back and clean sweep 3 maps in a row because they have the better. Like this team does not have the shooters it needs. Like Keiko, yes, he's a shooter, but the rest of the team doesn't really shoot that well. Okay, Nats. I'm sorry, Nats does. And while this team definitely has some decent shooters, they don't have that superstar power that we see on a lot of these teams. Um, of course, Kiko was looking like Prime EA, so Prime Demon One, like so. Be wary of Kiko, and if he has a good tournament, this Team Liquid team could look better than I think. But I genuinely do believe that this Team Liquid team will just kind of falter and might even be worse than Trace. I would say at this current moment, I put them below Trace because I do feel like Trace has potential to go further than what I think Liquid does. So yeah, moving on. Team Vitality, final team now, and this is, as we probably expected, going to be the second S tier team. Although I do feel like this Team like there's a bigger gap for me between G2 and Team Vitality than there is between Team Vitality and the two A teams. I feel like the two A teams are probably kind of close to Team Vitality, while G2 isn't really that close. But yeah, I feel like Safe had a really underrated tournament as well. He looked really good. Obviously, the big name here is Durka. I mean, those numbers are ridiculous. I know we talked about Kong Kong earlier, but like this is the second highest we've had now, and it's still like 20 below, 20 ACS below. But Durka just looked ridiculous this tournament. He did cool off a bit at the end, but that's natural, playing better teams and all. But yeah, he just looked ridiculous this tournament. No matter the opponents, it was just insane. And like in general, just this entire team just shot so well. Like Cakes looked good, Les looked good, Dirk looked good. Dirk looked insane, to be fair. Trex looked good, and say like every single player performed, and I feel like that's huge for a team like this. But I do think for this team to be able to compete for that trophy, they will need to at least perform at shoot at this level for the entire tournament. Like they need to look as good as they did in EMEA. They need to look at the international stage, or this team is not going to be able to compete for the trophy, I don't think. So yeah, overall, this is my ranking. This does not mean that the teams will finish this way. As I do feel like I would say any team from like 8 through I'd say 8 through 5 I could see shifting around. It, although I will say like shifting around, like not in terms of power, like how good the teams are, but like I could see T1 going out really early. Like genuinely, same with EDG. Honestly, even Sentinels, I'd say the top three are probably the ones I'm the most confident in. But other than that, I mean, or actually no, top two. DRX, I'm not super confident in, but I think if they, as long as they look good on stage, I don't think this team is going to struggle at all. As long as they don't crumble to pressure, DRX should be the top three team, and it's not really not an argument to be made against that. I don't think. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.